Next thing to do is to add a score. One of the main parts of Flappy Bird is, of course, the score and seeing how fast you can get, or far you can get, sorry. And what we've got at the moment is, I'm just going to delete some of these things here. We've got our very basic room. I'm not sure why that guy's up in the corner there. Let's put the player in here. And we've got that object somewhere in the room there. And we've also got our object player. I keep bringing up that one. Object player with what happens when it's outside the room, what happens when it collides with the obstacle, what happens when you push space, what happens when you push create. We've got all those things in there. The obstacle, when it's created, it jumps to a position just outside the room at a random height, but not too random. We don't want it to be completely off the screen, and we've set a horizontal speed. Now this is pretty slow at the moment, just for testing, because I'm not very good at the game. And we've got a check event. If the X value of that obstacle is less than -20, so it's off the screen, reset it back to the other side and set the Y to a random value as well. Now we're going to create a new object called score. We don't need a sprite for this. The reason is it's just going to be an invisible object that displays some things on the screen. So when we create this object, we're going to call it object score. We're going to have a create event, and we're going to set the variable score to 0. So the score is going to start off at 0. And we're also going to set the variable can score to true. Now, there's a few different ways that you might be able to do something like this here. You could have an invisible object. Let's just run the game. I'll just show you what it looks like at the moment. I've taken that score thing out. But we need to determine when that object has passed the plane. And there are a few ways we could do it. We could make an invisible line there, and when it collides with it, we give the player an extra point. The way that I've decided to do it was to check to see if the plane is in front of this thing, then we give the player a point. The problem is, every single frame coming up from now, excuse me, every single frame from now, the obstacle's in front of it. Oh, I've died. I'll just reset. So every single frame from now, the object is behind the player. So it would just keep giving them probably 60, 70 different points from now, and there'll be another 70 points on top of that. And that's because the X value of that is behind the player. So we just want to check it once for each time it goes past. So what I did, I set a variable, or created a variable called can score is set to true. And how this is going to work is it's only going to let it score 1 point. And then when the obstacle resets to the back, it's going to set this back to true. Then when it passes the plane, it's going to give him 1 point and set this to false. So in the step event, this is what it looks like here. If the object obstacle.x, so that's the X value of that object obstacle. So if that is smaller than the room width divided by 2. So it's smaller than the room width divided by 2. The other way to do it would just be object player.x. If it's smaller than the player x variable, and that's absolutely fine to do it that way as well, especially if your player's not in the center of the screen. The only reason the other one works is because my player's right in the center of the screen, but you might want to have it to the left or to the right a little bit, and this will work here. So I'm going to do it this way now. Object player, that's that there. The x variable of that, so whereabouts is that on the x axis on the screen. So if this obstacle is smaller than the player, we're going to check, is can score equal to true? So if can score is equal to true, we're going to set the variable score to 1. And that's going to be relative. Okay, so it's going to keep increasing the score. And then we're going to set the variable can score to false. So that means next time it comes through in that next step, it's just scored, the object obstacle is still moving behind us. It's going to check, is it smaller than the plane? Yes, it is. Well, can it score? If it's equal to false, then it can't score, so it won't actually do this here. And then I've got another check. If object obstacle.x is larger than the room width greater than 2, or in this case is larger than object plane.x. I'm going to set it to set the variable ken score to true, because it means that it's coming from the right. So as it's coming from the right, it's going to make sure that ken score is true. As soon as it's smaller, so as soon as it's on the left of the plane, if ken score is equal to true, it's going to set score to 1 relative to increase it by 1, and set ken score to false. It doesn't set it back. It doesn't set ken score back to true until the object is back on the right hand side. And then I've got a draw event. Now this is a special kind of event, and there's lots of different draw functions down here. And there's also one under the control, which is here, draw a variable. So what I've done is set the color, and I've just set it to white. So I've set it to white here, and click OK. And I've chosen to draw the value of a variable score, and room width divided by 2. So right in the center of the screen, 20 from the top. And I need to add that to my room. Now this looks a little bit weird because there's no sprite for it, so it doesn't matter where I actually put it. It's not going to show up in the game. Kind of just put it up in that top left corner, and I can mouse over it, and down the bottom of my screen here it'll tell me what it is. I can see that that's my object score. So that's going to keep track of the scoring in the game. So when I run it, I made a mistake there. I think in here I set plane instead of player. You may have picked that up before, hopefully. And so now when I do this and go through, 1, but it doesn't keep increasing it. And I go through it again and increase it by another 1. So there's our score. Next thing we're going to do is to make it slowly get quicker and quicker and quicker until it's really, really, really difficult for the player and gets harder and harder and harder. So let's do that in the next video.